This is Macro to Micro, and I'm Joel Marr. In this episode, we will be discussing the first of two physical creations in our world that are loaded with ancestral wisdom. And ancestral wisdom is defined as universal truths. And universal truths are defined as truths that exist in our physical, mental/psychological, spiritual/energetical, and emotional/emotion realms, free from unconscious fear perspective. And the reason why these two creations will be talked about is because the subject matter herein, as the channel unfolds, very much pertains to the principles that these creations reveal. The first of these two creations is as you see here, it's the Matryoshka dolls, also known as the Babushka nesting dolls. The background on these dolls is that they go back as far as the late 1800s to Russia, and they derive from what are known as Chinese nesting boxes, which came into our physical world about 1,000 years ago during the Song Dynasty. What's brilliant about this is that they took the nesting box principle or creation and used us as models. And the beautiful thing about this transition into nesting dolls is that the wisdom within can be seen from both a physical perspective and a non-physical perspective. So let's go with the physical perspective first. The physical perspective is the brain and body perspectives. It has to do with ancestral lineage. If you don't know this nesting doll concept, it goes like this. This small one nests in here, they both nest in here, and nest and nest and nest all the way up to here. So they all exist within this one babushka there. That's the ancestral lineage version of the Babushka Principle. Yet in order to speak from it from a non-physical standpoint, we will go ahead and take the four biggest ones here. Now the non-physical perspective, the descendant discovery perspective, is that these reflect the scopes of conscious awareness. Based on the last episode with the human evolution timeline, I had illustrated how our evolution, complete evolution, is going from body orientation into brain, into heart, into soul. And these four illustrate those reflections of the expansion of conscious awareness, the scopes of conscious awareness. So here we have body orientation. The scope of awareness is the smallest. Brain, it expands, heart, it expands, and soul is complete. They all exist within the soul orientation. Now with the body orientation, and referring to our timeline, it goes back to 200,000 to 50,000 years ago, where everything was primarily physical. It was the body discovering itself, the body learning how to use tools, learning survival, basic needs. A very slow going thing, because even though brain and heart and soul were all functioning at the same time within the body orientation had a limited scope of conscious awareness to know that these were functioning along as well, until the body experience, the experience of our body orientation reached its fullest capacity, and then the brain orientation kicked in. So with brain orientation, we're talking about 50,000 years ago to roughly 100 or so years ago, when industry into technology began, and began ushering us into heart orientation. But with these past 50,000 years, as we know, that is with example for the identifiers of the brain orientation in our physical world being the cave paintings, that was showing that the body was able to retain information out of time, was able to retain non-physical images, and started to really understand thoughts and feelings and expressions, and the mind began to grow, and the ego began to grow, began to discover all those things until heart orientation. Now before going into heart orientation, throughout the brain orientation, I don't know how far back it goes, where we as a human race began to speak of the heart and the soul in an elusive, euphemistic, figurative manner. There's so much expression about heart and soul in our world, through song, through literature. There's multitudes of perspectives on the experience of heart and soul. And yet it's almost like they've existed as placeholders for this moment, for them to come into the physical, because that's what heart orientation is going to be now. As we orient into the heart space, it's as if it's the period of the body meeting the soul. The soul comes into our physical space. That is how the evolution will continue now, as we go from physical orientation points to non-physical orientation points. These will all still exist concurrently, yet this will be the predominant thing, where non-physical energy comes in and transforms our physical world and transforms our non-physical perspectives, the understanding of our non-physical perspectives. So before going forth, I wish to address with you the four evolution principles of body, brain, heart, and soul. As it goes is, body orientation, the principle is physical to physical. Brain orientation is physical to non-physical. That's where our physical work, our expansion, our external expansion has created lots of thoughts, feelings, energy, sensations, emotions, pains, and fears. With heart orientation, as it comes in, that's non-physical into physical. So as that happens, with heart orientation, what's going to happen is all our thoughts, feelings, pains, sensations, fears, energies, they're going to become more three-dimensional to people in our physical space from non-physical points of view. And I'll talk a lot more about that as this channel unfolds. So with heart being non-physical, physical, soul orientation will be non-physical to non-physical. Now, with this Babushka principle, I'm going to take it from the physical perspective and the non-physical perspective in regards to a certain sequence. As was said, body, brain, heart, and soul, from a non-physical perspective, scopes of conscious awareness, the scopes expand. All of these exist within the soul orientation. And these two exist within this, both of these, and this one exists within all of these. The scopes of awareness expand from the non-physical. Now, let's see it from the physical point of view. The brain orientation, what I just described as a heart orientation. The physical orientation is this. So here is our big babushka. This is our big kahuna. If you go back to the physical principle of all the descendants fitting within here, go ahead and take that same sequence that we were talking about from the non-physical, body, brain, heart, and soul. And now that we know in this body is a brain, heart, and a soul, follow that sequence and see what happens. Body's the biggest in the space, and then brain's the next biggest, and then heart's the next biggest, and then soul is it's just thin air. So with that, you may notice from the outside, from the physical, when you're looking at it from the outside in, the same sequence, body, brain, heart, and soul, decreases in scope. Yet in the non-physical, you take that same sequence, the scopes of awareness expand. Also worth mentioning here is another principle with this. And with the second principle, we're going back to the final four. Based on the human evolution timeline I had spoken with in the last episode of body, brain, heart, and soul being the expansion of conscious awareness, notice this as well, how that's described. You can take these four as well, and you can take them into the concept of a full-term life. Body orientation, birth to 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5 years old. That's when it was all about learning shapes and colors and getting familiar with the body, getting into the body and the soul coming together in an unconscious way. Time is very slow. It's timeless. If you remember any of that, it's just childhood memories, maybe first memories. The rest is just highly unconscious. Brain orientation, we're talking about 5 years old to mid-30s to mid-50s. That's when we get out into the world. We begin to explore the world, begin to learn from the world, and also teach in the world, offer what we have that we've learned. And it goes through school, it goes through work, and it comes up to the point where if anyone has a midlife crisis in their lives, because not everyone goes through the midlife crisis period due to unconscious fear perspectives. Unconscious fear perspectives can overload the natural unfolding of human life and have overloaded on the natural unfolding of a human life. Nevertheless, those who experience midlife crisis, it generally will begin to happen in your 30s to your 50s, if you're going to have it at all. That is where it brings it up to here. And that's with the midlife crisis, that's when we find ourselves internalizing and introspecting and examining all that was taught via ancestral lineage, all that our ancestors taught us. And yet there's a lot of fears that came with us, because with ancestral lineage, it's a collective set of beliefs. And with those collective set of beliefs are unconscious fear perspectives that get passed down, that evolve throughout the ages. That's what happens in the midlife crisis, is when people get through it successfully or more fully, the reflection of the teachings that are filled with wisdom and the teachings from our ancestors that were filled with fear, it goes through a process of sort of like dissection so that we absorb the truths from the ancestral lineage and recognize that the unconscious fear perspectives are not actually truly us. And that's how we become true to ourselves. That can happen anywhere in that space of the midlife crisis, where when we come through that midlife crisis, we end up into heart orientation. And so with heart orientation, we're talking about, let's go mid-50s to up to retirement. That's when work is not so important. What's important are the matters of the heart. We do things that are more true to ourselves. We express ourselves more truthfully and own ourselves more truthfully in that space. And because of that, we bring creations to the world and expressions to the world that are truly ours with the ancestral wisdom that we brought with us and the descendant discovery of recognizing which teachings contained truths and which teachings were loaded with unconscious fear perspective. So here we are in the full term life. Now we're at retirement. This is all about reflection. This is about rest and relaxation. People work during their retirement. All of these things in our lives happen concurrently. They happen simultaneously. But if you notice that human evolution timeline that was talked about in the first episode, it follows that same pattern in a full-term life. Now let's take an even smaller principle, a full-term day. Body orientation, you just woke up. It's all about brushing your teeth, washing your face, showering, getting ready for work, eating breakfast. Then after body orientation, brain orientation. It's all about going to work. It's about going out into the world, exploring, expressing, giving to the world, receiving from the world. The 9 to 5 period. Right here, heart orientation, it's coming home from work. It's regathering. It's having dinner. It's talking about the day. And then after dinner, soul orientation. That's when we rest, we reflect, we relax on everything that's happened throughout the day. So if you notice in the human evolution timeline, that full scope, they exist in scopes. They exist in a full-term life, that's a scope. Full-term day, that's also a scope. And those are the principles with the babushka creation I have today. Up next, I will be talking about the second of the 2 ancestral wisdom creations, and that one is the seesaw. If you have any questions or other expressions, the comment section below is your friend. Until next time, I'm Joel Marr. Thanks for watching.